realizing his error later, was now powerless to stop the combined forces of the ulama of all the schools who had now taken up residence and were dividing up the governance of the empire. It was too late. So without knowing it, he relegated the Khilafah and put the scholars back in control of all affairs again. The conflict between secular earthly rulers and the scholars had ceased for now, as the secular had canceled their own power. It was too late by the time he realized what had happened. A panel of scholars was now chosen by the Qadi, and they began to administrate and try to heal the damage done by centuries of layman rule. The creed books written by the Qadi were accepted by the Khalifa and made the sole teaching documents of the Khilafah, and any books not in conformity were rejected. So, in this time, there was not just the fact that the ulama wielding the spiritual power and other things that come to power. Now the rest of the matters of the ummah were combined into one. And so the Mu'tazila were now completely removed. And at some points, Imam Abu Ya'la's text, Ibtal al-Ta'wilat fi Akhbar al-Sifat, that book became the sole teaching aid throughout the empire during that time. That text is pretty much an expansion and commentary on Imam Ahmad's books and a discussion of why there are differences between the Ash'aris and Hanbalis. So it's 3 volumes long. In printed Arabic now, it's 3 volumes long, each one about half as thick as an adult fist. 3 long volumes. If you understand that, and you have a deep perception in that particular text, you will not be swayed by any of the foolish arguments on one side that there can only be one position on every matter, and you won't be swayed by positions on the other side that the Ash'aris today are merely Mu'tazila, and so are the Maturidis, and you won't be swayed by these silly arguments. You will understand that Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, as Imam Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la had said, that the Ash'aris are included among Ahlul Hadith, and what we include as Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. During this time, Abu Nu'aym Al-Isbahani died in the year 430 AH. He is the author of the text Hilyatul Awliya. It's a book that discusses, from the early generations up until his time, the different scholars of Tasawwuf or Ihsan. Their wonders, their life, what happened in their life, and historical points as well, and anecdotes about them. Abu Muhammad Al-Ghibari Al-Hanbali in 432 AH. Abu Al-Qasim Al-Zaydi Al-Harrani in 433 AH. Abu Talib Ibn Al-Baqal in 440 AH. Abu Al-Abbas Al-Barkami in 441 AH. Ibn Makula, who was a Shafi'i scholar, died in 447 AH, as he was the chief Qadi in the judiciary. And then Ibn Hazm Al-Zahiri died in 457 AH. We discussed Dawood ibn Ali al-Zahiri before, about the self-made scholars and people who were proclaiming to be absolute mujtahids. He had left behind a very small number of students. And it's mentioned in Al-I'tisam that some of the Zahiri people from that madhab used to pray in the masjids in Andalus. And when the Imam recited the ayah, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa, that the most merciful is above the throne, the Zahiri used to break their salah and say, Qa'idan, 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 sitting, sitting, sitting. And after the salah, they would always try to find out who it was to kill them, but obviously they could never find them. One of the scholars that came later was Ibn Hazm. Ibn Hazm was from what we're calling the Zahiri school. He believed, although doing taqleed himself, that taqleed of the 4 was haram, and that every Muslim is obliged to be an absolute mujtahid. He considered and castigated the Ash'aris as deviated. And part of it had to do, again, with the access to books that he read and the documentation that he had in front of him. When you actually examine Ibn Hazm's creed, it's probably more close to the Ash'ari creed that he despised, or he claimed that he despised, than any other. But again, he did not have full exposure to it because that was what was happening with the Abbasids. Ibn Hazm left behind a number of books, and he is the only person on record claiming scholarship that said that stringed and musical instruments are halal. He's the only person we have on record that's ever said anything like that. He was defeated in a debate after challenging Abu Walid al-Baji, the great Maliki scholar, rahimahullah. He was, shall we say, verbally disemboweled in a debate on the island of Majorca, which now, unfortunately, is known for other things besides Islamic scholarship. But at that time, Majorca was, when you wanted to study and things like that, you could find some scholars there. Now, you don't study Islam there. You study other things. You don't study Islam in Majorca. Now, finally, we have Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la, the alim who started it all and changed things by Allah's fadl. And Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi al-Khuzra Jardi, who died in 458AH, both of them, both Qadi Abu Ya'la and Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi. This is one of Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi's books in English. It's been translated, Allah's Names and Attributes. It's only an excerpt. The full text, Allah's Names and Attributes, the full book is 2 thick volumes in Arabic. This is a nice summary, but it's not everything. Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi, in fiqh and in creed, did 2 things. He was a Shafi'i. In creed, he was able to satisfactorily put across the Ash'ari creed in a cogent fashion to where the Maturidis didn't call them deviated anymore. Because there was a lot of rivalry between the scholars who were Hanafis and Maturidis and the Shafi'is who were now coming into the Ash'ari creed. And so once they heard the exposition of Imam Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi, they said, no, this is not deviation or philosophy. This is the correct creed. We reject your use of Platonic reasoning and sophistry, but it is the proper creed. It is said of Imam Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi by the Shafi'i scholars, every scholar owes Imam al-Shafi'i a debt in fiqh, except for Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi, for indeed Imam Shafi'i owes him a debt. The reason for that is because in the East, when the Hanafi madhab started becoming in vogue, trendy, hip, stylish in Central Asia, if you wanted to be in step with the times and everything else, you wanted to be hip, you became Hanafi. And the Shafi'is started to fade from power. And people began to use Abu Ja'far At-Tahawi's books as a reference point in Hanafi fiqh. Now remember, Abu Ja'far At-Tahawi was Shafi'i in the beginning of his affair, and then became Hanafi, and became quite harsh against the Shafi'is. And so the Hanafis were using those books against the Shafi'is, saying, yes, the Shafi'i madhab is da'if, it's weak, and becoming harsh with the Shafi'is. And so Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi had to defend the Shafi'i fiqh from charges that it was weak and that the hadith they were using were incorrectly explained and everything else. And the Hanafis were using arguments like, well, we're now larger than you in number, so we must be correct and the most correct position because there are now more of us than you. And then number 2, look at our administration. We have a more complex and cogent system of law and ruling, and you don't. We've ruled longer, which was the position that they used, because the Hanafis classed the Shafi'is in terms of administration as primitive. Because remember, If you've ruled and you've governed, you have experience and know-how with how to administrate. Hanbalis had ruled and governed. Malikis had ruled and governed. Shafi'is had ruled and governed, but not with the same wide, at that point in time, not in the same wide expanse as the Hanafis had. So the Hanafis said the Shafi'i madhab is primitive. You don't want to be mutakhalif, you don't want to be backwards. You want to go forwards. And so the Central Asian people said that's right. And so Afghanistan converted from the Shafi'is over to the Hanafis and said we want to be moving forward, progressive. And so they went forward. And Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi was able to do two things in ending regarding fiqh. He calmed a lot of the unnecessary arguments between the two schools that sometimes led to fistfights and violence. He calmed that, number one. And number two, he returned the debate to more, in Central Asia, to a more academic, measured, reasoned discourse. Because it was not right what was going on in Central Asia, where some of them were destroying each other's minarets and damaging their own masjids by some of the common people. Because the common people were taking things too far and saying, well, we're going to damage their minarets, those Hanafis, we're going to get them this time. And the Hanafis would say, well, we're going to teach the Shafi'is a lesson they'll never forget. We're going to demolish their dome. Or we're going to rock their masjid. Throw rocks at their masjid. That wasn't right. And the scholars both at that time period, although they differed with one another, both were agreed that that was not right. And so Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi returned the discourse to a reasoned approach in which laymen and scholars could sit and listen to the proofs of the evidence and let themselves be convinced by the truth of what was there. أقول قولي هذا استغفر الله لي ولكم أستغفر الله إن الله غفور رحيم يرحمني الراحمين. Alhamdulillah, we have completed, and we have completed a little bit more than a century. Now, I know that I might have spoken very quickly and gone through a lot of material. I apologize if maybe I left out some things or there were some questions in anyone's mind. Is there any question over anything we've covered? Yes.
Interesting lecture again. The Al-Qadi text that you said is available in English.
Yes. Question is regarding the Quduri text that's in English. I have seen the cover that was sent to me by the brother that translated it, and it is called The Mukhtasar of Al-Quduri. The Mukhtasar of Al-Quduri, a manual of Hanafi law. If memory serves me correct, that's what it had there. I'm not sure if it's changed since it went to print, because it's gone to print and now it's been published. But that was the preliminary title that he sent to me. But it is published. I saw it in the bookstore when I went down a couple of weeks. This was weeks back. It's there. It's in the bookstore just down here, just on the the road over here. So it's there. It is there. That's correct. That's correct. It is there. That is there. Yes. Is there another question? Another question? Yes.
Sorry, one or two small things. Do you know, you mentioned Harun alayhi salam had passed away before Musa alayhi salam?
Yes.
How do we know that?
We know that they passed away because of the historical documentation that we have. We have the tarikh of Imam Abu Ja'far Al-Tabari, rahimahullah. We have the historical sources of Ibn Kathir in his Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya. We have Al-Muntazam by Imam Ibn al-Jawzi. What's that?
Any of them related back to Hadith?
I would say that if you look at Tabari's Tarikh is generally taking from Hadith or the understanding of the first three generations. So I would go with that book for the closest source to it because it has the understanding of the early generations within it. So the question was regarding the historicity of the statement that the Prophet Harun alayhi salam predeceased the Prophet Musa alayhi salam. And that can be found in the Tarikh of Imam al-Tabari. Yes? Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned also, do you know Zahiri school in...
Zahiri.
Yeah. Andalusia. They used to say in the namaz, when that verse came around,
yes.
Mercy. They were saying sitting, were they specifically referring to Mutasalat, sort of creed that has a physical?
Okay.
What were they sort of trying to
the question is regarding the Zahiri members in Andalus